here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it is going to be the turn of the indie band, just for a change, the Jack Rubies, yes, who formed in 1985 and released various, albums on Criminal Damage Records and TVP Records. This is an interview I did very recently with Ian Wright from the band, who is now based in New York. So after a few minutes of casual chat, as you do, we got down to the importance of John Peel. And yes, the 80s, it wouldn't be the same without John Peel. So after mentioning that, which I have to say isn't the most exciting thing, this was Ian's response. After that, this is kind of conversation gold. Anyway, enjoy. Ian, tell us what you thought of John Peel.
No, 100% for me was the John Peel show. I'm old enough to remember John Peel pre-punk, just about. But the whole experience of listening under the bedclothes after the lights are out, when he was still playing things like The Faces and then Faust and strange stuff like that. Right before the punk revolution, and of course I was completely in the right place to absorb all that.
Yes.
And reggae. I mean, I'd never heard reggae until, well, I had. I mean, I'd heard Desmond Dekker on Top of the Pops and Dave and Ansel Collins, that kind of thing. The pop reggae that was just starting to happen. But roots reggae and that whole gateway into world music through the John Peel show when I was, 15, 16. Good times.
Yes, well, it was because I think in the 70s it was that there was a period of the Grateful Dead, Jackson Browne, then the Ramones and the Damned, and it was like kind of was a real, for those hardcore 60s 70s fans, it was like, no, John, you can't start playing the Ramones and the Damned, and it was a bit like, I did read it. There was a good book which I got recently called, I don't know, Good Night and Good Riddance. And it was talking about that period where he'd almost kind of was becoming kind of irrelevant. And then punk came and it was like, right, I'm right there. I'm back on the game. I'm relevant again. Up to then it had been like, well, music wasn't that great, but then it was just like, okay, this is kind of relevant. And it was the 80s. It was like, you mentioned reggae. I think that's when I used to go and see Aswad and Misty Roots and,
Sure.
Sly and Robbie. They used to do these kind of events at the UEA, the Taxi Gang, and there was Gregory Isaacs and Dennis Brown and Augustus Pablo. So yeah, John Peel was like, before that you might have had Bob Marley, but then that was it.
Really. Right, yeah.
So that was fun. So look, anyway, as you guess, I was born in the mid 60s, so I'm in my mid 50s now. So so I was kind of growing up in that world of Top of the Pops in the early 70s with like bands like The Sweet and obviously Gary Glitter and Slade and then luckily David Bowie was my first person. There was Alice Cooper. So what were your formative teen years? Those kind of years that you suddenly went, oh God, actually this is brilliant. I'm really excited by this and my parents hate it.
Yeah. All of that stuff, but the one that really completely struck a chord with me was Mark Bolan, T-Rex, and little, almost like the John the Baptist before Bowie, if you know what I mean. He was like, he opened the door of glam rock, really. I wanted to be Mark Bolan when I was 11. I mean, I really did. I was absolutely obsessed. But that led me to Bowie, and I'm sure anyone of our era is going to say Ziggy Stardust. But yes, of course, it was a hugely important record. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I probably missed that, but I got the Space Oddity, which was reissued, and that was luckily my first single was, and it had a B-side which had changes in Velvet Goldmine, which
Oh yeah,
obviously
great song.
you
Yeah.
just thought, side two, the B-side is good. Obviously, it goes downhill from there.
Well, that's what I loved about T-Rex. I don't know how familiar you are with their early glam singles, but they always had two songs on the B-side. They were usually, for any other band, they would have been the A-side. At least one of those two tracks would have been as good, great singles. So always great value for money. And I just, in terms of that period where you change from being a boy to just starting to, on the cusp of adolescence, that weird period where you become aware of sexuality and, there's a grown-up world. It's just over there, but it's something that I can almost touch, but I can't quite touch it. For me, that was Mark Bolan. That he was like, there was something risque about him that I found fascinating, and that led me into all the rest of glam rock from there on. And then in some ways David Bowie took over from that, but I'll always treasure the sort of Electric Warrior period of T-Rex.
Yes, I know. It was kind of amazing, and obviously he was there with his show called Mark, didn't he? Which he started to
sure. That was a bit later, but yes, yeah, indeed.
As he was slightly sort of looking a bit more chubby and not quite with it anymore. But anyway,
yeah, he was kind of that was like Mark Bolan in Vegas period.
Yes, actually, I never thought of that, but that sort of his Vegas period. But yeah, so then as we trucked into the 80s and indie pop started to become a thing.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I put indie pop down between the years of 83 to 87, which is the years of the Smiths. That's kind of not a watertight theory, but there was definitely there was a punk period, and then you had that post-punk world of the Gang of Four and Wire and lots of sort of, not scratchy, but there were bands that were a little bit kind of awkward, almost like Peel and bands like that. And then you had sort of Echo, and then Echo and the Bunnymen and Simple Minds, U2, and then kind of the Smiths came along. And that made quite a difference. And everyone I've ever spoke to, there's like three bands that a lot of people mention. Orange Juice, June Brides, and the Smiths, and the Go-Betweens sometimes. So how was the early 80s for you?
I mean, it's funny you mentioned those bands. It's I'm sorry if everybody says the same bands, but I guess they were all very important with different levels of success. I mean, the June Brides were almost contemporaries of ours, the early gigs, and we'd certainly see them around town a lot. But those, the witty lyrics of Edwyn Collins, Morrissey, for sure, made a big impact on me as a budding songwriter. I suddenly saw that you could be. It didn't all have to be about, the usual suspects in terms of what you're writing about. You could have this arch kind of sly, very British sense of humour to the lyrics, and I loved all that, and that made a huge impact on me.
Yes.
So that all of those bands, and actually including the Go-Betweens, who I discovered later, really. But I really love some of their music as well. All of those bands were very important to me.
Yes, I know. Well, actually, I was much more of a Triffids fan than the Go-Betweens, but it was kind of later on that I sort of, I suppose, discovered their records. So did you, because in the early 80s, we'd had the sort of Falkland, and then there was the miners' strike and Thatcher, and there was a lot of unemployment. So there's definitely people who got into a lot of bands were often unemployed. So they were doing the Job Seekers Alliance or Enterprise Alliance. But then there was the kind of the student years, which now people look back and can't believe, because you got a grant and housing benefit, and sometimes you're sort of you cancel tax paid. So what were you sort of up to in the kind of early formative 80s period?
Before the band formed, do you mean? Well, I was an art student, And I went to Reading University. I was studying painting and filmmaking. When I was at Reading, I met Stephen Ineson, who was in the Jack Rubies. And we were in a band together at college. At that time, the kind of things we were interested in was bands like the Gang of Four and Television. So more spiky kind of new wavy things, not so much it was pre, I guess Orange Juice were going then actually, but it was pre the whole Smiths period.
Yeah.
So I was an art student. I went to art college because I was interested in art, but I was also determined, obsessed, I would say, to form a band or be in a band. And that had been a ambition of mine since I was a teenager. I'll take it all the way back to Mark Bolan and T-Rex and glam rock. When I was 11, 12 years old, that inspired me to get a guitar and to write some very naive songs at that, but that got the bug going for actually, I want to write songs, I want to play the guitar, I want to do all those things. Anyway, so teenage years go past, see a lot of the punk bands, go to art college, and that's when I actually did get into a band with Stephen Ineson. The band was called Russian Drugs. We never released anything, but we played and we got a taste for being on stage and all the things that being in a band, all that kind of let's get ready for the show and all that kind of stuff. That all happened. In 1983, I moved to London with this other guy I knew from Reading called Stephen Brockway, who became the bassist in the Jack Rubies. And we found a drummer, and the drummer's name was Peter Maxted. So there was the three of us, Stephen Brockway, myself, and Peter Maxted. We didn't have a name. We didn't play any gigs. We just rehearsed and tried to figure out what we were trying to do. And sometime around that period, and I'm guessing by now we're into 84, 85, probably 85, I reconnected with Stephen Ineson, who was also in London. And he was doing a project which included a percussion player, and this was Lawrence Giltnane. So I've named the 5 Jack Rubies, and we were all sharing the same rehearsal space, his project, my project, and we combined forces, and that became the Jack Rubies. That's basically how the band started.
Because there was definitely, I mean, that was a great period for sort of that guitar bass, slightly jingly jangly sound, wasn't it? That kind of, I often talk about 83 to 87, which were the years of the Smiths. So there was definitely a feeling that a lot of things going on. And obviously Neil Taylor, I mean, you formed the band just before the famous NME cassette came out, C86, but the NME was always putting those cassette compilations out, which I was always very excited by and buying them, even if it was country and western or jazz. But so because in that period, and something that I hadn't sort of appreciated so much until sort of looking back on it, was that you got these gatekeepers which were really interesting. It was really important, so that I think bands now, from what I can gather, but I'm an old person, so I'm completely out of the loop, but it's kind of difficult to sort of play in front of anybody else that you haven't personally blackmailed to come and see you. Whereas then, you kind of, if you got to play on the John Peel show and then possibly a John Peel session, there's likelihood there was all these venues around the country that you could just get a phone call and someone say, could you come to Leicester, or could you come to Brighton, could you come to Norwich or Leeds? And people would just get in the van and go. And that kind of created that network. And also you had the NME, which had something like, I don't know, 100,000 copies printed, and then you had the Melody Maker and Sounds and Record Mirror. So that kind of network was just so important for bands, wasn't it? Because you gave people that kind of incentive to improve their work.
Yeah, and I think that we were literally, Steve Brockway and I were living in a squatted house in Stoke Newington, with no telephone, and my office was the cool box at the end of the street, and I would go down there with the big bag of 10p pieces, and we would be hustling for gigs at places like the Sir George Robey pub in Islington, and gosh, what were some of the other early gigs we did? But little gigs here, there, and everywhere. We would hustle for them, and we would play to anybody, and we would make friends with some of the other bands in the scene. The Time Box in the Bull and Gate in Kentish Town, that was the other big one. The Time Box next door to what was then called the Town and Country Club. And it was all bravado, and we've got a record coming out. We haven't got a record coming out. We've got a record coming out next week. Can we play 17th on the bill? We would do all this stuff. We would kind of learn our trade and cut our teeth. And then when we did actually make a record, then we weren't playing. I mean, I'm exaggerating, obviously. We weren't playing 17th on the bill. We were now playing 5th on the bill or 4th on the bill. But once there was some press, the enemy was very important in the Melody Maker and Sounds. Once there was some interest from the music biz papers, that could translate very quickly, especially if you got airplay as well, if you were lucky enough to get John Peel playing a track, or Janice Long for that matter. That could translate very quickly into, yeah, you got the phone call. You want to play in the pub in Leicester? Yeah, sure.
Princess Charlotte.
Exactly.
That's the one, wasn't it? I always remember John Peel saying, they got this gig in, I can't remember the place in Leeds. It was or the Bradford 1 in 12 club, or the Prince, the Prince Charlotte.
It was a circuit. It was certainly a circuit.
It was a really indie circuit, because I saw, I look back at some of the bands I saw. I thought, God, I must have just heard the one single. Oh, they're playing in Norwich for £2. I'll go and see them. So, but your first single, "Foolish Boy," was that the kind of the first time you went into the studio and your first kind of recordings?
No, that was not our first single. That was our third single. The first thing we did was it's a self-recorded 6-track mini LP, and it was called Fascinating Vacation. Oh, no, I'm sorry, it wasn't. That was a later record. You have to bear with me, because these events happened 30 years ago.
Yes, this is true.
We made a series of recordings which were not specifically for a record. We made a recording of 4 songs, and we were giving out the tape to people left and right. And one of the indie record labels, which was called Criminal Damage, they were based in Reading, picked it up. They really liked it. And they said, great, if you pay for 2 more songs, you have to go and pay for it yourself. We'll put it out as a 6-track mini LP. And that's what happened. So it was on this small label, Criminal Damage. The record was called Witch Hunt in Lotus Land, which is another name of one of the songs. And that garnered quite a bit of press interest and some after-hours radio play. We didn't have a press agent or anything like that at this point, but suddenly we were in Time Out, we were in City Limits, whatever the other magazines were. Every week there was now a picture of us, a small picture, tiny little picture. There's now a picture of us and playing at the Rock Garden or playing at Dingwalls or whatever it was. From there, 2 very big things happened. One was we got picked up by a booking agency called Concord Agency, which meant that they, rather than me going down to the phone box at the end of the street trying to hustle for gigs, now we were getting gigs through the agency, and not only playing Dingwalls or the George Robey or wherever it was, but you're also supporting. You get a phone call. Yeah, you're going on the road could often be with an incongruous band like Katrina and the Waves. You're going on the road with Katrina and the Waves for 4 dates, and you're playing fairly big theatres. So you would suddenly be playing in that kind of environment on a Monday, and then on the Thursday you'd be back in playing in the pub again, for the usual. And that was a wonderful, wonderful experience. The other big thing that happened right about then was we signed a publishing deal to what was then called Chapel Music, later became Warner Chapel Music. So suddenly there was some real proper music business interest in the group, and that made a big difference. Then, because of the Warner Chapel connection, we went on to make a total of 4 indie singles with their help. One of them was Foolish Boy. You're quite right, that was one of our singles. That was the third one. The first one was called Be With You. The second was called Lobster. The third was Foolish Boy. And the fourth was called Wrecker of Engines. And all those songs, spaced over a couple of years, were indie singles, making appearances in the indie charts.
Yes, blimey. Because one of the record labels you're on, TVT, I've never come across before.
Well, that's okay. I was going to say that's kind of the next stage of what happened. 1 second. I've got a slightly sore throat, so I keep drinking this lemon tea. Anyway, TVT was a New York-based label, independent label, but when I say, not independent in the sense of somebody running a record label out of their house in wherever it was.
Sarah Records in Bristol.
Exactly, yeah. This was like a Manhattan-based record label that it was officially independent, but had plenty of connections with the music business at large. Their main, at that time anyway, their main discovery and sort of protege was 9 Inch Nails, which is completely different to what the Jack Rubies were doing, but nevertheless was extremely popular industrial sort of hardcore band, extremely popular in America and generated a lot of attention for the label. TVT loved the Jack Rubies, and what they did was they said, can we have all of the indie singles that you've done and make them into an album, bar 1 or 2 tracks? We said, yes, of course you can. And there was we were trying to, we had got to the point where we'd made these 4 singles in the UK and we wanted to make an album, and we couldn't get the funding from us, from whatever was going on. We just couldn't get to that next stage. We want to make an album. That's what we want to do. At that point, TVT came into the picture and gathered up all the singles and said, let us put this out and see how that does in America. And it did quite well. And especially the very first single that I mentioned, Be With You, became quite a big college radio hit in the States. And the accompanying video for it was picked up by the still quite young MTV at that point, and would be in rotation when they had their sort of indie shows. This was in 1988 at this point. So 1987 was kind of our golden year in the UK, where all those singles were coming out, and that a lot of touring and a lot of press and all the rest of it. 88, we were obviously still in the UK, but 88 was when this American part of the adventure began to happen.
Blimey, that must have felt quite surreal, going so quickly from sort of, the George Robey and that club scene to suddenly a major player like, TVT, who, 9 Inch Nails came to be this huge kind of like band, well, artist anyway. So yeah, that must have, so how was the dynamic within, you know, the Jack Rubies? Because obviously it's quite hard to keep things like that together when you're quite young, not quite knowing how to navigate these kind of tricky waters.
Yeah, no, it certainly was. We felt that we were bumping our head against the wall because, as I said, we'd had a lot of positive press in England. We were living in England. We were touring in our own right, and we'd done some quite big tours, opening up for people like the Triffids, who you mentioned before, which was such a great time, that Triffids tour, and Stump. We toured with Stump, and slightly more pop orientated, we toured with the Blow Monkeys, which was amazing because we ended up playing in places like Hammersmith Odeon. But we still felt that we'd come to a point where we couldn't go any. We didn't seem to be able to get from whatever rung of the ladder we were on to the next rung. And there was some within the band, some frustration about that. It's like, well, it's been great so far, but do we carry on now? Do we just go for another year playing the same venues again, trying to put out another single? And, you know, the music business was starting to change, or music was starting to change in that period. There was the burgeoning rave culture bubbling under at that point, and it became, you know, a bigger facet of what was going on in 88, 89. This American label TVT seemed to step in from nowhere at the point where we might have split up at that point. Not in angst, but just because, hey guys, it's been great, but I'm not sure where we're going from here. So we were living in a strange world because we lived in London. We had actually a very popular album on the indie scene in America. We were becoming less noticed in the UK. So it was a strange situation.
Yes.
What happened next was that in 1989, which was sort of the height of Manchester and the rave scene and all of that, which was nothing to do with what we were about, TVT came back to us and said, we want you to make another album of all new material. And we want you to go into the studio with a name producer, which ended up being Pat Collier, who was a member of the Vibrators. He had produced before us the Wonder Stuffs album. He'd done some stuff with the House of Love, early Primal Scream, these kind of the Creation bands, My Bloody Valentine, that kind of thing. And he recorded an album with us in 1989, which was officially our second album, but really our first album of all new material. Never released in the UK. It was only released in the States. Excuse me. And then we went to America and we toured that album for about a year after that.
Yes. And is this the album, just to make sure, because there's a few, See the Money in My Smile, or is it the one which is titled Fascinating Vacation?
Fascinating Vacation is the collection of all the indie singles. That was the first album in the States. And See the Money in My Smile is the second and final album, which was all new material.
Yes.
The Pat Collier.
And how did you, because with it was interesting you mentioned that period, because I noticed that with because that you know, that kind of thing about the indie scene from 83 to 87, which, you know, were the years of the Smiths, but when they split up, the party felt like it had slightly finished. So a few bands came along after that, like the Sundays, and it almost felt a bit like, ooh, I mean, they became quite big, but there was something different. And like Ecstasy came along, and there was definitely like the music press, and everybody was like Soup Dragons, Primal Scream, Happy Mondays. It was definitely going to be that period. And then you had the Pixies, and it's like, okay, grunge next. So any of those guitar-based bands were literally sort of not struggling, but they, like My Bloody Valentine did well. Carter, The Unstoppable, Sex Machine did quite well. And there was bands like Lush as well. But there was definitely like I mean, it's a very simplistic narrative that I've got, but there was definitely a bit of a problem for some of those bands that didn't fit in that kind of cultural zeitgeist period that we like as kind of fans, and I suppose the music press like as well, because it makes it quite a simple narrative. And then you go, right, next thing, oh, it's Britpop, brilliant, next thing, whatever that is. So so I just wondered, you must have felt that it was quite a strange time. Oh, that was what I was going to say, because most bands, they have a 5-year narrative. They get together, they spend 12 months doing their thing. John Peel gives them a John Peel session. First album, not bad. Second album, tension in the band. And most people say, then if they ever tour America, they always go, and then we came home and split up because it was just finished us off. So how did you cope with the American kind of experience?
Well, we did split up after the American experience. It was, the group had been, you see, when you talk about different zeitgeists and different groups of bands that fit into a certain pigeonhole, I'm not sure if the Jack Rubies ever really did. We were, through our whole story, we were never really a band. We were an indie band for sure, but we didn't look like some of the other bands. We would dress up more. I'm sorry, my throat's killing me. We had a percussion player, which was a strange thing, which is because of my T-Rex kind of thing.
Yes.
So I loved the fact that there was the congas on the stage. I would look at the stage sometimes before the gig, think it looks like T-Rex are going to come on. Great. But that was kind of that was my ethos, my whole thing. But when we went to America, I'm running away, losing the question now. How was our American experience? Okay, yes. So when we went to America, so there were two things happening. There was the rave culture thing in the UK, which was not happening in America, but grunge was just beginning to happen. Neither of those things, nothing really that would chime with us, unfortunately. So we were in a strange position. But the band had been kind of, not obsessed, but there was always an American element to what we were interested in. I don't mean American music specifically. Some of the writing was about a kind of, the witch hunt in Lotus Land period, and all the early stuff especially, was about a kind of exploration of a weird America that didn't really exist, from British people, English people looking at it from afar, not having not been there before. The sort of seedy side of American culture, the David Lynch kind of aspect of it, that whole thing. So going to America was absolutely a fulfilling experience. It seemed to us like we're actually going to go and explore one of our areas of inspiration. We toured with They Might Be Giants. We did a nationwide tour with them, which was actually an awful lot of fun. We continued touring our own sort of club dates throughout America. And then we toured again the whole country with Modern English, fore band. And that whole chunk of time was about 5 or 6 months touring continually, living in a different country, living on the road. And I think by the end of it, we were sort of like wild animals We're very, very strange. We were not wild with each other. We were just almost like gypsies. It was extremely strange state of affairs. None of us felt very grounded. And the record that we were promoting was not doing as well, and that was the deciding factor in the band calling it a day.
Yes. Was it a combination? Was it the band, or was it the label that said this isn't happening, or was it just a combination of everything?
It was a combination. I mean, the band didn't split up. We didn't have a meeting and go, we're stuck because it's not working out. We wanted to continue, but the support was ebbing away, and the infrastructure was starting to deteriorate. TVT were not going to fund any more touring or another record. So there was a period of détente or whatever. There was a period where no one really knew what was happening, because there were contractual obligations with both them and with Warner Chappell Music, the publishers, and eventually it just started to fizzle away, and that's what happened.
Yes. So did you have one of those moments where you sort of sat down to say this is it, or did everyone just not turn up to a meeting?
Well, I guess again, I've got to think back a long time to get the exact facts, but I think the way it worked out was, we as I was saying, we were touring in America. We didn't live in America. We didn't have homes in America or anything like that. So we were living in hotels or staying with people and that kind of thing. At the end, at a certain point, everybody in the band went back to England except me. I wanted to still be on the spot with TVT Records and see if we could figure this thing out, what happens next. So things were kind of in hiatus. Stephen Ineson, who was the other guitarist and songwriter with me, after about 2 months, he wrote a letter to each member of the band saying that he was leaving. So that sort of came out of left field, and we didn't split up then. The remaining members of the band did not at that point split up. I came back to the UK, and we continued to record demos, both with, actually Pat Collier helped us out. Again, he let us do some recording with him, and the Warner Chappells funded some more demos. TVT was not answering our calls, and Steve Ineson was starting to begin another project on his own. Neither of those projects really came to anything. The sort of second version of the Jack Rubies and his other project, and at some point in 1991, at this point where we got to, everyone kind of said, okay, that's it. But it was never angst-ridden in the way that there was any falling out with the members of the band. We were all sad that it had come to an end, but we were still felt very close to each other.
Yes. And is that what makes this record called the Vons tapes? Is that the material for that last particular album, which was on TVT?
The Vons tapes is what we thought our first LP proper would be. It was a series of recordings we made in England before we'd officially signed to TVT. They put out the first American record, which was the collection of the singles. We started to record what we hoped would be at least the main part of a a real album of new material. It was rejected by TVT, and that's when we did the Pat Collier album. But it was recorded by us. It was a recording made by us that was kind of on ice for 30 years. And as the members of the band communicated over the years, we all said to each other, we really like that Vons, it wasn't called the Vons tapes when we made it. It was just, that was the name of the studio. Everyone likes the Vons material. It sounds more like the band did at that time. And although we're all proud of See the Money in My Smile, it has got a big 80s production on it, and is more locked in time with the basic sound of the record. I think the Vons tapes really does sound like how we thought the band sounded. And so I don't know how it all happened, but we rediscovered a copy of the masters of that record. We found a digital copy of it in somebody's archive in the band, and we put it out last year.
Yes, well, I saw it, and it's on Spotify as well, which is kind of fantastic because it
is on Spotify, and also just fairly recently, about a month ago in May, because we have the rights to the first record, which on in Lotus Land, the 6-track mini LP, the very first thing we did, we put that out on Spotify and iTunes as well, so you can find that there as well.
Yes, which is all very handy. I guess the material for your TVT is just never going to see the light of day.
Well, that's a good point. We're not sure. We're actually we're not in discussion as such, but we are trying to re-release that material because TVT sold they went out of business. They sold their whole back catalogue to another record company, but we'd already been dropped by TVT a decade before that happened. So we're not even sure. We're trying to. It's a long story, but we're trying to find out if the rights to those 2 American albums actually belong to somebody, or in fact they're ours. They can be returned to us. That's an ongoing sort of mystery that we're looking into right now.
It sounds like Sherlock Holmes, doesn't it? Really?
It is a bit, yeah. It's a bit of sleuthing going on.
I think, but it's interesting. Have you had that experience? I did slightly mention at the beginning where after like you have these kind of events and you live them and then you move on and you obviously have done lots of other things. And then 20, 30 years later, you sort of start thinking, actually, I'm kind of revisit it for various reasons, think I really just want to archive this material and just, I don't know, sort it out because no one else is going to do it. Was that sort of a motivation for the last couple of years with the band?
Yeah, absolutely. I once the Jack Rubies ended in the early 90s, I did 1 or 2 musical other things, and so did other people in the band. But by the mid 90s, I was like, I wanted to kind of close it. I was done, and I tried not to think about the Jack Rubies very much for the next 20 years. There's other things to do in life. Those were a very formative part, years in my life, and in some regards have influenced much of the decisions and things I've done since. But you cannot live in the past. It was a fantastic ride, and I've been doing other things. However, I'm guessing in the last 3 or 4 years, I've been carting around from one place to another for 30 years, several boxes of Jack Rubies ephemera, whether it be tapes, footage, photographs, press, whatever. I've got a lot of, I suppose it is an archive. And I've never really wanted to look at it very much until quite recently, the last few years. And that coincided with the 5 members of the band all starting. We've been in touch throughout the whole period, but we've all started at this point in our lives to talk more about that time. And so I think there has been a concerted effort to document it, archive it, And I would just like to have all of the stuff that we did out in the public, available for whoever wants to hear it, because it's a history that we all took part in, and in a greater, not just the band, but in that whole era of what happened at that time, the '86 generation, that whole thing,
Yes,
which we were a part of, and it's like it's historically relevant. I mean, it's I'm fascinated by many of, not just, I'm glad that we were part of it, but I also love a lot of the music and culture of that time. And so, yes, a long-winded answer to your question. Yes, that's what we are trying to do.
well, it's interesting. I guess, it's interesting because I've sort of gone back and started listening to it and not wanting to sort of relive my past, but just kind of curious as sort of picking through it and then sort of discovering things that I missed the first time and finding it quite interesting, and then sort of realize, oh God, actually lots of other people seem to be doing the same thing. And then suddenly thought, oh yeah, it's 25, 30 years. It's obviously a thing that we slowly, and it's probably to do with, those boxes that you've kind of carted around. And one day, after sort of go, oh God, I don't want to think about that. I've got other things on.
Yeah.
And then one day you lift the lid and you think, oh, how interesting, and obviously there's those videos you've got on YouTube as well, which obviously must bring back a lot of memories of seeing you sort of there dancing and gyrating.
Well, they do, and it's I don't know what it is. It's something in the air about that period. It just seems to be a lot of people interested in that period again right now. So great. I'm glad about that. If you'd gone on YouTube 6-7 years ago, you probably would find it very difficult to find anything about the Jack Rubies. If you go on YouTube now, there's like loads of stuff. If you go on Twitter now, there's loads of stuff, and it's and not just us, many of our contemporary bands of the time as well. Same thing.
Yes.
So, and your show, I mean, let's face it, it's all about the same stuff. So
it's about the indie world. Yes, but it's interesting because I think Cherry Red Records, I mean, I just noticed that, a couple of years ago, they brought out a 7 CD, box set for Manchester, and then a 5 CD box set for Liverpool, and then they had one on Sheffield and one on Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
Other variations on sort of goth or alternative stuff. And then, and then they reissued the C86 as a triple CD, 66, compilation. Then they did C87, 88, 89, 90. You can see where they're going with this, can't you? So they're just kind of going, all right, we can hoover all these records, and here's 66 tracks, and here's some nice footnotes. And, you think, oh, God, that's really handy, because I used to have the flexi disc of that, but now they've got it on this compilation. And, you listen to it and you think, God, I didn't ever listen to tools that you can trust, but now, here I am. And it's quite interesting stuff. Yeah. So it's, for some reason there were, and I probably sound like a very old person here, but, reminiscing, but there was a lot of creativity during that period, which is quite fascinating. I suppose that's what I've found, that's kind of, it's that thing with the John Peel, Janice Long, possibly Kid Jensen, the NME, but then all these venues all over the country that just organically allowed people to go and tour, and suddenly you could go, God, I've got, I'm going to all these places around the UK, and it's kind of makes it kind of exciting. And I think, a lot of bands now just don't quite have that kind of Monday night at the Norwich Wild Club or something like that. It just doesn't exist, because there isn't 200 slightly skinny kids with, pale complexions who are going to just turn up and watch a band because they've heard John Peel play it,
Yeah. Well, I also think, we're probably around about the same age, and whenever, and most of the people in the bands of that we've been talking about are as well. And so you look back at a point in your life when and especially what point it was, the 80s, I mean, which is a very grim, strange period in British history, for people of that age coming, who were whatever they're, 18 to early 20s. That was a very strange time to be living through for all of us. And again, the creativity that comes from uncertainty and the grimness of the whole situation of the Thatcherite years. When you now look back on that, and it was in another century, and then this is another weird thing. I always think like, God, it was in another century. It's so long ago, but in some ways it isn't. And I think all of us, it's not so much nostalgia, it's remembering who you were when the whole of life was still before you, and how can I use this in the most creative way. And that's what a lot of people did.
Yes, absolutely. I know. I do remember, you just nearly lastly, but I do remember we did moan a lot because being from the slightly left of centre or the far left of centre, we sat around, and then I looked back and God, and thought, you got grants for going to, getting a degree, enterprise allowance and job seekers allowance, and all these great, these kind of quite amazing schemes that made it quite comfortable to live, and and you think, God, we didn't really take it, we were all still feeling so impoverished. But now, it's like you leave university or college with a horrendous debt, then you just went, no, we just got it all for free. It's like
it's true. That's true. Yeah.
Yes, I know. And I know when my brother just let us leave, he went to university, and I mean, he could get housing benefit and sign on in the holiday period, and he couldn't even be bothered to sign on in Easter or the summer or Christmas, because it's like, well, I could do, but I don't really care. But look, lastly though, what would you say to an 18-year-old, self, if you could have said something to yourself back in those early days? I just wondered what you would have sort of whispered to them, just to say, look, I've got some advice for you. You might ignore it, but here it is.
I think I would say treasure every, if you get on the ride that you're getting onto, bearing in mind that from when I was about 14, 15, I was kind of obsessed by the idea of being a pop star. I would say treasure every moment of the ride, because it's not going to go on forever. When it's over, it's over. And that's not to say that I didn't enjoy it. I did enjoy it. But I wish I'd been able to have a microscope and just kind of like every strange and wacky and wonderful situation I found myself in that 5 to 6 year period, which I would never have been able to do if I hadn't been in a band that was able to travel and make records and do all those things. I would say to myself, just take it all in, remember everything about it, just drink it in.
Yes.
And I tried to do that, but I think I could have done it even more.
Yes, I know. It definitely beats interrailing, doesn't it? 5 years in a band, you know what I mean? Because it is quite, 5 years, it is quite a serious amount of time, plus 3 years at college or university,
Yeah.
It does kind of shape the person, and you can't, that experience of America, most of us go for a week or two, but to go and actually see every city in that context must be, all those cities or towns must be fantastic,
and it's shaped the person I am today, because it's extraordinary. I used to say to people at the time, and I think it's true now, is that we never felt, they say, well, that must have been great, you saw all these places in America. Or actually England come to that, because we toured all over England continually, in Scotland and all the rest of it. But especially in America, it was like, well, it wasn't like being a tourist, but it wasn't like you really knew the place either, because you would go to somewhere for 36 hours, maybe maximum, 24 to 36 hours, you'd be in a certain place. The road crew would know the places to go. They would know, this is the best place to go and get dinner. This is the best place to go after the gig. So you get kind of a weird aliens landed on the planet for one day kind of version of what that place was. Some of those places I've been back to since for whatever reasons, and it's not the same. It's to experience them as a visitor is different from experiencing them as a member of a traveling circus. Both are good, but they're different.
I would imagine. Yeah, I know. But look, this has been, Ian, this has been fantastic. Well, thank you ever so much for this. And when I do it, I'll send you, I'll podcast it, and then I'll send you a link, and you can always put it on your page, because you got Jack Rubies.
Yeah, that's great.
And then yes.
And do you sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it. Actually, that was all I had to say.
Oh, I was going to say, what's the sort of the lag time between when you do the interviews and then you actually do a broadcast?
Well, normally quite quickly, actually, because
oh, really?
Yeah, I try and sort of keep on top of these things, but yeah, so it's good, so it's been getting, it's it's funny. One of my main fans at the moment is Alan McGee, which is bizarre. He's sort of he seems to be obsessed with listening to them, which I thought, blimey.
Well, I've listened to a few because how it came down was like, we see the message from you on the Jack Rubies Facebook page, and I go, who's this guy? And I see that I see that one of your friends, or Steve Brockway, the bass player, who actually lives in New York also. I see that he's friended your friends on Facebook. So I say, who's this guy? And I also see that you're friends with Mike Barnes, who I know as well, the journalist. So I say to Steve, I call him up and I say, who's this guy? And he tells me all about it. And he says, yeah, he does this great radio show. So I listened to it and I looked through some of the old shows. And there's a really great selection there of stuff. And many people who crossed my path or crossed our paths when we were in the band. So I listened to a couple. I listened to the one with Stephen Bird, Jowhead,
yes.
because we lived in, the band started in Stoke Newington, and he was also in Stoke Newington, and he was like the godfather of the music scene in that little bit of London at that time. So I knew him very well back in the day. And what was the other one I listened to? Oh yeah, John Parrish. John Parrish I used to know at one time because he was on the same label as us in the Warner Chappell period. But I think it's a great cross-section of really quite, well-known artists, and also people who are maybe you've forgotten about, but they were part of the scene, and it's great. I love it. I think I'm going to try and work my way through some more of them.
Well, there was a scene, because there were, because I'm really curious on things, because there was in probably that area called the ambulance station, which was a squat, and there was a band who was kind of part of that scene called the Hangman's Beautiful Daughters, and they only brought out various random 12-inch and flexi discs, and that has just been. And they all worked with Dan Tracy, who was the other kind of legend in that area. And there's a little label called Optic Nerve Record based in Preston, who started reissuing and releasing all this stuff. So yes, and there's a few. There's one called Cloudberry, which is based in New York, who do the most obscure indie stuff from that period. Fire Station Records in Berlin or Germany, and then Optic Nerve, which is also in Preston. So there's these kind of guys who decided to and that guy Jowhead did the notes for this one called the Hangman's Beautiful Daughters.
Okay, yeah.
And she now, one of the members, lives in Las Vegas, who I've kind of become vaguely friendly with. But it's interesting that this was the first venue that Jesus and the Mary Chain played. I think either in London or in the country or something. So it's become slightly famous, the ambulance station.
Well, as a matter of fact, it was where we did our first ever gig, the ambulance station in London, or actually ever. And it was a gig that Jowhead's band, one of his bands was called The Palookas, and they were the main band and we were the support band, and that was at the ambulance station. That was our earliest. It may not have been the first one, but it was a very, very early performance, and that would have been in 1985.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know the play. I know what you're talking about.
I know. Well, because a lot of the Australian and New Zealand bands, they all sort of, most of them, left their hometown and came to squat in London, and they all seem to stay in basically the same street. So
very true.
It was quite an interesting period, the squatting world.
Well, there was two. I mean, we were part of. There were two big squat centres. One was around that ambulance station, Vauxhall Grove, sort of Stockwell area, and then the other one, the one that we were involved with, was in Hackney in the Stoke Newington, Dalston area, where there were a lot of artists and bands and writers who were signing on and or doing an enterprise allowance scheme. And they, basically, as mentioned before, the kind of irony was in the Thatcher years, somehow, ironically, there were these government programs and loopholes that enabled artists to survive, which is kind of like, if they'd known about it, perhaps they wouldn't have done it. But it actually enabled a lot of people like me to do what I wanted to do in my early 20s.
Yes, I know. It's good. Anyway, look, thank you ever so much again, Ian. And this has been good. Now I have to work out how to do Skype end. Okay, look.
One last question. Do you need any music? Because the two American albums are out of print, but I can also send you files of any of that material if you want me to.
Oh yeah, actually that would be really handy if you got an MP3 of anything, because
I can do that, because the first record, Witch Hunt in Lotus Land, is available, as is the Vons tapes, which sort of bookend the careers. One's a retrospective compilation, and one is the very first thing we did. The two bigger records, as I say, we're trying to figure out how to get those out, but I can certainly get you MP3s of one or two key tracks if you would like.
Yeah, because that's interesting, that story you had about Nine Inch Nails, because I remember I watched one of those documentaries, which I love, about Dr. Dre, and is it called Jimmy Iovine?
Yeah, I saw that myself, yeah.
And he was obsessed with Nine Inch Nails and just was talking about being on the phone to this guy who owned Nine Inch Nails like day and night, even when
the guy they're talking about is it was basically our label boss. Yeah. So I'm not going to comment on that, but yeah, all I will say is that many acts on TVT left with a bit of a sore feeling.
Yes, well, it was kind of, when you mentioned Nine Inch Nails, it's like, okay, that story of Jimmy, hassling this bloke. Yes, so there you go. You must have sat up when you mentioned that. Went, fuck, that's.
Yeah, I certainly did. Yeah.
I've got a story here. Pause it. I'll tell you something. I know, it's funny, isn't it? Really, it all comes around. It's an amazing story. Anyway, look, thank you ever so much, Ian, and I'll send you my email. Is that okay?
Yeah, please do, and I'll send you some files. And really appreciate the interest, and good luck with the show.
Yes, well, it's good. Anyway, look, take care and have a great day.
All right, take care.
See you. Bye.
All right, bye-bye.
I know, it's all very casual stuff here. It's showbiz. It's so not. Anyway, look, a massive thank you to Ian Wright from the Jack Rubies for giving me the time for that interview. This has been David Eastaugh, the C86 Show. If you want to contact me, you can on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. It is C86 Show. And also, they've all been archived, so you can find them on Spotify, iTunes, and Podbean. Don't forget the last one. Anyway, look, have a great week. Stay safe.